I'm going to talk about 3 books. The first is about a woman living in a cottage in Ireland. The second is about a young woman living in a cottage in Ireland who is depressed. And the third is about a young woman who is not living in a cottage in Ireland but is profoundly depressed. Now, there are obvious connections here, but the key one is that these 3 novels, we are completely inside the heads of the protagonists, and we experience their, I suppose the technical word is their phenomenology, how they perceive the world, what the world feels like to them, how they inhabit the world because of how they feel about the world. Now, the first one, Pond by Claire Louise Bennett, is the writer is English, the character is English, she lives in Ireland, the character lives in Ireland, and she is not depressed, but she is very much living on her own. And what we have, and I've spoken about this before, is a writer who has one of the most original voices in literature in a long time. And I know one shouldn't use qualifiers around the adjective original, but hell, I just did. There are more or less original voices, and she is one of the more original voices. She's also one of the most charming voices to be with. It's interesting. I meet people who I expect to love this book and they don't, and I meet people who I expect to hate this book and they love it. And so it's quite odd who relates to her. I mean, I'm not even sure that I did particularly relate to her. I just related to the extraordinary prose that was just unpicking how a person conducts themselves in life. Now, the second book, which is A Lie Made by Walking, by Sarah Baum, who wrote Spill, Simmer, Wither, Fall, I can never remember what it is, but anyway, which is a wonderful novel about a man and his dog, with one of the most brilliantly sustained patches of prose I've read in a long time, the third section, Road Trip. This new novel is about a woman. She's originally English but grew up in Ireland, and she's in this novel she's staying in her late grandmother's country cottage somewhere in Ireland, and she's an ex-art student, and she is suffering from a kind of ennui, a kind of inability to kind of relate to the world, to be motivated, to find energy. It's on the cusp of depression, I think, rather than depression itself. But I think the key thing for me about this book is that, once again, one feels what it's like to have one's emotional life kind of pressed and suppressed, and what it's like to kind of live in a kind of narrow emotional corridor. And this is done wonderfully, and it's done very bravely, because there is no attempt to make this a novel with a plot. It is merely a novel about expressing what it feels like to be in a particular state. All the way through, she talks about artworks that she remembers based on those, as I said, the kind of narrow experiences she's having in this depressed state in her grandmother's cottage. And actually, this was the revelation for me, and it's, in a sense, it's a side issue, but I've never been a fan of installation art or conceptual art. I've always found that conceptual art installations, once you've had the idea and you just say, I'm going to do this, you kind of done it, really. The execution is pointless. The idea is everything. But actually, she makes a case for conceptual art and installation art to be metaphors for moments in life. Now, I would say, perhaps controversially, that artworks as metaphors aren't art. Art is something else. Art is a sort of transcendental expression of a experience in life that becomes uniform. Now, actually, that's probably a description of a metaphor. But in the end, I don't think one can articulate what great art is about. I think it becomes this kind of inarticulate expression that somehow talks to us, whereas metaphors, actually you can draw down from them and discover what they're trying to say and kind of go, yes, I can relate to that. I mean, if you take a great piece of work, a great piece of art, let's say Caravaggio's The Taking of Christ, we are moved in an inarticulate way. But can we relate to it? I don't think so. Similarly with the abstraction of music, we can relate to it, but we feel moved by it, but we can't relate to it because it's purely abstract. It's the same, I think, that great art or art does that. Whereas this, but actually, I think what this does is it says that creative work as metaphor is hugely important when one's in certain places, to kind of go, actually, there are those kind of coordinates that other people are feeling and they're expressing them this way. And on that level, I think this is a really, really important book about someone who, many people go to art school. She clearly can't, she's clearly struggling to make an artwork, although she is taking pictures of dead animals she's finding. It doesn't amount to very much. But she has a kind of writer's block, an artist's block, and actually, what she's feeling is herself, narrowed and shrunk because she can't express herself, and she may never be able to. I'm not sure it's as successful as her previous novel, and it feels a bit like a first novel that she's found time to work into a structure, but it is fascinating and intelligent and brave and clever, but maybe not wholly successful. But as a if one has inclinations to be an artist and wants to know the great pitfalls, the great emotional barriers and obstacles that one might face in failing to be an artist, I think this is an important book, and it is obviously and of course beautifully written. And the third book, which I've spoken about before, is by Kate Armstrong. It's called The Storyteller, which is published by a very small press. Pond is published by Fitzgeraldo. A Line Made by Walking is published by the brilliant Tramp Press in Ireland, and this is published by Holland House. This book is the bravest of the three, and at times it is as well written, but it takes. Sorry, my son is just calling me. Okay, he's revising for his exams. This is a novel about profound oppression. This isn't about a person's personality character being narrowed or shrunken. This is about it almost being obliterated. This is a person who's suffering almost complete lack of affect, can't feel anything, exists what they feel like in a kind of vacuum. I have some some familiarity with depression, but I imagine it's actually more like Sarah Baum's depression, or lack of ennui or lack of affect, rather than the depth of in the character in Kate Armstrong's. But I can see it, I can feel it, and this is partly I think because of my experience, but partly because her prose works to take you there. It's tough, it's opaque, it's unsentimental. It feels like, and I've said this before, it feels like, it's just another Irish writer, it feels like kind of mid-period John Banville, when he doesn't offer the reader any solace. He basically says, this is what it feels like. These are the sense impressions of this person. And this is what Kay Armstrong does. And there are many prolonged episodes where it is like feeling as though as the world has completely withdrawn, and that you have no emotional response to it, and that you lack complete any of the emotional coordinate. In fact, it's being suppressed almost to nothingness, but knowing that you have to, unless you die, that you have to move forward in life. It's called, someone once said it's kind of ambulatory catatonia. You're just walking through life in a kind of catatonic state. And she does this with supreme artistry. Now, I think there are issues with the beginning and with the end. So I think there are kind of technical issues that could be, that would maybe need to be resolved. But as a sustained piece of writing of what it's like to be in the head of someone with depression, I think it's a real victory. And it almost is a paradox, because obviously someone who felt like this could never write. That would be, it's almost this paradox with the Sarah Baum thing. She's actually, what she's doing, or irony, of course, is that she's writing about what it feels like to not be able to create work of art, but what she has is essentially trying to create a work of art. But I think all three of these things, and I love all three books. I probably love Pond most because I love great prose, and this is prose of almost, just so wonderful, and she's so charming, and it's funny, and it's surprising. But the other two are doing something which I think is really important, which is putting a certain mindset on the page and saying, I'm not going to make this easy for you as a reader. You're going to go through this with me. And for that reason, I think all of these three need to be read. You could almost read them as a triptych and kind of go, well, we may love Claire Louise Bennett's prose, and we may love being with her, and we may, but actually she's got the freedom to be as charming as she is, because she's not suffering from a kind of, from depression. Whereas the other two don't have that luxury, and they're not pretending to. So it becomes a very powerful experience of mental ill health, while both being very well written. And I think that's all I have to say about that. Thank you very much.